Hello students, today we will be starting with a new topic. The new topic name is primary activities. This chapter is present in the class 12 book of human geography. So today we will be studying about primary activities. What do you mean by primary activities? So you are already aware of the term primary activities. What do you mean by primary activities? Those activities which deal with raw materials came to be known as the primary activities. Here we will be understanding about hunting and gathering. What do you mean by hunting and gathering? So the earliest human beings, dependent on their environment for their sustenance, they subsisted on animals which they hunted and the edible plants which they gathered from forest in the vicinity. Now, if I talk about the earliest human beings, which means the early men, the early people, they mostly used to depend on animals. They used to hunt other animals. Also, they used to depend on plants like some of the forest plants through which they can survive. So first they used to be dependent on animals, and second they used to survive on forest plants. Also, primitive societies dependent on wild animals, people located in very cold and extremely hot climates survived on hunting. The people in the coastal areas still catch fish, though it is modernized. Now, if I talk about the primitive societies, now what do you mean by the primitive societies? Those societies which are still traditional are said to be as the primitive societies. Now, those people still depend on hunting. They still depend on hunting and they gather small plants and fruits. You can say they depend on small plants and fruits so that they can survive, which means they go to the forest and collect some of the plants, some of the edible plants through which they can survive. Also, many species now have extinct or endangered due to illegal hunting. The early hunters used primitive tools made of stone twigs or arrows, so the number of animals killed was limited. Now, if I talk about hunting and gathering, there are a lot of limitations on hunting and gathering. First of all, most of the species become endangered. As a result, people go in search of the food in the forest areas, in other of the coastal areas, or you can say in other of the isolated areas. Most of the plants, most of the animals get extinct. They become endangered. Why? Just because due to the illegal hunting. Due to the illegal hunting itself, most of the species has become endangered. Most of the species has become extinct. For example, dodo. Dodo was mostly common in the Mediterranean area. So as a result, dodo became extinct. Why? Because due to illegal hunting. Also, on the other hand, these are carried out at different levels, at different orientations. Gathering is practiced in regions with harsh climatic conditions. It often involves primitive society who extract both plants and animals to satisfy their needs for food, shelter, and clothing. Now, if I talk about gathering is practiced in most of the region, and if I talk about hunting and gathering, this is one of the most oldest tradition, or you can say one of the most oldest activity ever found. Also, on the other hand, with the help of gathering and hunting also, these are mostly practiced in the primitive societies. In the primitive societies itself, these two things are mostly common. Also, on the other hand, both plants and animals to satisfy their needs for food, shelter, and clothing. This type of investment requires a small amount of capital investment and operates at a very low level of technology. Now, if I talk about hunting and gathering is mostly common in the primitive society. Also, on the other hand, very small capital investment is required. Not a very huge capital investment is required, only small capital investment is required. Also, on the other hand, low technology is required, which means these are still primitive, or you can say traditional. Also, on the other hand, if I talk about gathering is practiced in high latitude zones which include northern Canada, northern Eurasia, and southern Chile. Low latitude such as Amazon basin, tropical Africa, northern fringe of Australia, and parts of Southeast Asia. Now, if I talk about gathering in my own language, so first of all, gathering is practiced in most of the hilly regions as well. Also, on the other hand, in the high latitude region and in the low latitude region. Also, in the most extremely cold and hot climates, hot climate places also, the gathering and hunting is mostly preferred. Also, you can see on the other hand, those areas which are too much of a forest kind, there also gathering is mostly common. In modern times, some gathering is market oriented and has become commercial. Gatherers collect valuable plants such as leaf, barks of trees, and medicinal plants, and after simple processing, sell the products in the market. Now, if I talk about gathering, you see now this generation is of AI technology. As a result, our technology is advancing. As a result, gathering is now becoming market oriented. Most of the small plants, twigs, also on the other hand, many medicinal plants are being collected and they were being sold in the market, which means they are market oriented. Also, gathering has little chance of becoming important at a global level. Products of such an activity cannot compete in the world market. Now, a very great advantage of gathering. A very great advantage of gathering is that gathering is mostly common in the primitive societies first of all, and it cannot compete in the global level. It cannot compete in the global level. Also, on the other hand, uh, most of the gathering cannot be practiced in the world market. You see, gathering is mostly common in small villages and small towns, but in the global level, it cannot compete. So this is the advantage of the gathering. I hope so you have understood about gathering. So now we will be understanding about agriculture. Now what do you mean by agriculture? Here we will be understanding about different types of agriculture. Here you see, agriculture is practiced under multiple combination of physical and socio-economic condition, which gives rise to different types of agricultural system. Based on methods of farming, different types of crops are grown and livestock raised. So here we will be understanding that how many types of agriculture is there. You see, if I talk about agriculture, agriculture is practiced in different socio-economic societies. Also, on the other hand, on the basis of the number of people, also agriculture is being practiced. Also, on the other hand, agriculture, there are various systems of agriculture. Those various systems of agriculture has evolved just because due to the growing number of population first of all, and second of all also due to the socio-economic condition. Due to the socio-economic condition itself also, there are number of agriculture that has came into practice. Also, on the other hand, there are different types of agriculture. Those different types of agriculture is related to crop pattern as well, to the growing of the crops as well, and also are related to livestock as well. If I talk about livestock, which means taming of animals, different kinds of animals are known to be as livestock. So here we will be understanding the main agricultural system. First comes the subsistence agriculture. It is one in which farming areas consume all and near of the products locally grown. It can be grouped in two categories: primitive subsistence agriculture and intensive subsistence agriculture. You see, subsistence agriculture. Subsistence agriculture is practiced mostly on locally grown crops or in locally grown products. So those type of agriculture is known as subsistence agriculture, which means only locally grown crops or products are being sold in the market or are being market oriented. Now, here the subdivision comes primitive subsistence agriculture. Now, under subsistence agriculture, we have understood that the locally grown crops are being sold in the market, and here comes the primitive subsistence agriculture. It is also known as shifting cultivation, which is widely practiced by many tribes, especially in tropics such as in Africa, South and Central America, and in Southeast Asia. Now, if I talk about primitive subsistence agriculture, this is also known as shifting cultivation. Very, very important. This is also known as shifting cultivation, and this is mostly practiced in Africa, South and North America, and also in Southeast Asia. So, in those places, shifting cultivation is mostly common. Also, the vegetation is cleared by fire and the ashes add to the fertility of the soil. Shifting cultivation is thus called slash and burn agriculture. Now, why shifting cultivation is called slash and burn agriculture? Very, very important. It comes in your examination. Now, first of all, if I talk about slash and burn agriculture, first the whole area is being burnt, and those ashes led to the fertility of the soil. Yes, those area where the crops were being grown, after the crops were being grown, it has been harvested. Slowly that whole area is being burnt, and whatever the ashes are there, they are being contributed to the fertility of the soil. So this is known as the slash and burn agriculture. Also, the cultivated patches are very small, and the cultivation is done with the help of primitive tools such as sticks and hoes. After some time, the soil loses its fertility and the farmer shifts to another parts and clear other patch of the forest for cultivation. Now, as this is primitive subsistence agriculture, as a result, this is still done in a primitive way, which means hoes and other traditional methods are being used to do the primitive subsistence agriculture. Also, on the other hand, when the area is being burned and most of the land has been consumed as a part of the fertility, then the farmers will be going to the other area, and then they will be going with the same process with the slash and burn agriculture, which means this ground has already loosened its fertility, and they will be going to the other area or to the other patch of land, and then they will be clearing those forests with the help of the slash and burn agriculture, and there they will be growing the crops. So this process repeats from one land to another. So this is known as the slash and burn agriculture, also known as the shifting cultivation. I hope so this is clear, and now we will be understanding one of the major problems of the shifting cultivation. Now, what are the disadvantages of the shifting cultivation? First of all, the cycle of jhum becomes less and less due to the loss of the fertility in different parcels. It is prevalent in tropical region in different names such as jhuming in northeastern states of India, milpa in Central America, and Mexico ladang in Indonesia and Malaysia. Now, if I talk about one disadvantage of the shifting cultivation, which means the fertility of the soil loses. The fertility of the soil loses. As a result, the land becomes barren. It has the chances that the land will become barren. Also, on the other hand, this process is known as the jhum process or the jhuming process. Now, what kind of names are being given to the shifting cultivation or to the primitive subsistence agriculture? First comes jhuming in northeastern states of India. Jhuming in northeastern states of India. Second comes milpa in Central America and Mexico. Milpa in Central America and Mexico. Ladang in Indonesia and Malaysia. I hope so this is clear. Now we will be understanding about intensive subsistence agriculture. This type of agriculture is largely found in densely populated regions of monsoon Asia. Besides, there are two types of intensive subsistence agriculture. Now, intensive subsistence agriculture is mostly practiced in the highly populated region. The areas which are very much populated, like for example towns and cities, there only the intensive subsistence agriculture is being practiced. Also, on the other hand, intensive subsistence agriculture is dominated by wet paddy cultivation. This type of agriculture is characterized by dominance of rice crop. Land holdings are very small due to the high density population. Now, here we will be understanding the first type of intensive subsistence agriculture, that is the intensive subsistence agriculture. The intensive subsistence agriculture mostly grow wet paddy. They mostly go wet paddy, for example, rice. Rice is grown and it is an example of intensive subsistence agriculture. Also, on the other hand, land holdings are very much small. Land holdings are very much small, but the crops are densely grown. The crops are densely grown, which means more crops of rice are being grown on the small patch of land. Also, farmers work with the help of the family labor, lending to the intensive use of land. The use of machinery is limited and most of the agricultural operations are done by manual labor. In this type of agriculture, the yield per unit area is high but per labor productivity is low. Now, if I talk about this intensive subsistence agriculture, most of the family members practice this kind of agriculture first of all, and second of all, very low technology is being used here. Very low machinery is being used here, though the irrigation facility is there. Also, on the other hand, yielding is very much. There are very much of a yielding, but the labor productivity is very low, which means much of the labor is not being implemented on this type of intensive subsistence agriculture, which means yield per area is very much. There is yielding of crops in comparison to the labor productivity, which means labor productivity is very much low, but the yielding is very much high, which means the growth of the crops is very much high on the small patch of land. Also, agricultural operations are done by manual labor, which means there are very low technology. Low technology is being implemented, but here the manual labor is being done. Mostly the manual labor is done in comparison to the use of the technology. Now, here we will be understanding about the intensive subsistence dominated by crops other than the paddy is due to the difference in relief, climate, soil and some of the other geographical factors. Wheat, soybean, barley and sorghum are grown in the northern China, Manchuria, North Korea and North Japan. Here first we will be understanding about the intensive subsistence agriculture, in which of the places it is being practiced. First of all, wet paddy or rice cultivation is very much common in the intensive subsistence agriculture. Also, on the other hand, geographical factors also come into existence. Now, if I talk about the geographical factors such as the climate is there, the type of the land is there, the terrain is there. Also, on the other hand, the soil and the climate, the relief. The soil, climate and relief are very much of the characteristic of this kind of intensive subsistence agriculture. Also, on the other hand, wheat, soybean, barley and sorghum. Wheat, soybean, barley, and sorghum are being practiced in northern China, Manchuria, North Korea, and northern Japan. In India, wheat is grown in western parts of Indo-Gangetic Plain, and millets are grown in dry parts of western and southern India. Now, wheat. If I talk about wheat, wheat is grown in the western parts of Indo-Gangetic Plain. Wheat is grown in the western parts of Indo-Gangetic Plain. So wheat is grown in the western parts of Indo-Gangetic Plain, and millets are grown in the western and southern India. Now, if I talk about millets, millets are mostly being grown in the drier parts of the region. Also, most of the characteristic of this type of agriculture are similar to those dominated by wet paddy, except that irrigation is often used. Now here, if I talk about intensive subsistence agriculture, irrigation is very much common. Frequently, the irrigation is being used so that the growth of the crops can be proper. Now, here we will be understanding about plantation agriculture. So we have understood about primitive subsistence agriculture and intensive subsistence agriculture. Now we will be understanding about the plantation agriculture. So, plantation agriculture was introduced by the Europeans in colonies situated in the tropics. Some of the important plantation crops are tea, coffee, cocoa, rubber, cotton, oil, palm, sugarcane, bananas, and pineapple. Very, very important. If I talk about the plantation agriculture was being introduced by the European itself. The Europeans introduced the plantation agriculture. Also, on the other hand, the plantation crops. Now, what are the plantation crops? Coffee is there, cocoa is there, cotton, oil palm, sugarcane. They are known to be as the plantation crops. Like for example, cocoa. Cocoa is mostly common. This agriculture is being practiced in Africa. In Africa, cocoa is mostly common. So here only in some parts of Africa is there, North America is there, South America is there, the plantation agriculture comes into existence. And also in some parts of India, for example, Southern India. Southern India is very much famous for the growth of coffee. The characteristic feature of this type of farming are large estates or plantation, large capital investment, managerial and technical support, scientific methods of cultivation is being done. You see here, very high level of technology is being used, high investment is required, also capital investment is required. Also on the other hand, here single crop specialization is there, which means on one patch of land too many crops will not be grown, only single crop is grown, which means single crop specialization is there. Also on the other hand, there must be good system of transportation so that those crops can be transported to other parts of the country. Also, it is cheap labor is being used. Now, why there is cheap labor? First of all, in plantation agriculture, not much labor productivity is there. But on the other hand, there is a use of more technology. More technology is being implemented so that the crops can grow. The crops can be grown in a proper way. But here, low labor productivity is there. Also, which links the estates to the factories and markets for the export of the products. Now, the French establishes cocoa and coffee plantation in West Africa. The British set up large tea gardens in India and Sri Lanka, rubber plantation in Malaysia, and sugarcane. Here, this part is very much important. Now, if I talk about the French people actually grown cocoa in West Africa. And now, if I talk about tea plantation is very much common in India. You know, in our northeastern states of India, tea is very much common. Also, on the other hand, rubber plantation. Now, rubber plantations are very much common in Malaysia, and sugarcane and banana are grown in West Indies. Yes, sugarcane and banana are grown in West Indies. So these are plantation crops. These are actually being founded by the European people itself. Also, Spanish and Americans invested heavily in coconut and plantation in the Philippines. Now, if I talk about the Spanish and the American people invested heavily on the coconut and the sugarcane plantation. Today, the ownership of the majority of plantation has passed into the hands of the government or the nationals of the countries concerned. Now, if I talk about plantation agriculture, long time ago, the ownership of plantation agriculture was completely dependent on the French people itself or the European people itself. But right now, it is completely under the government. The whole business, or you can say the whole plantation agriculture, is now under the national itself or under the government itself. So these are the following characteristics of the plantation agriculture. I hope so you have understood regarding the plantation agriculture, the subsistence, the primitive subsistence agriculture and the intensive subsistence agriculture. And if you want to know any of the courses regarding our institute, then you can contact us in this number 8683 836 383 91721. And thank you for watching my video.